I will take you with me. You might learn something.
About soccer?
Nah, mate. Not about soccer. And for fuck's sake, stop saying soccer!
I don't know if you're checking your social media as we're talking, but
no.
I just got alerts here, and this is just a few minutes ago from Deutsche Welle. Sports, Mr. Watzke.
Holy shit.
Yes, Mr. Watzke, spokesman for the DFL, quote, in view of the current developments, a successful continuation of the process, and that is the process of finding a media rights investor, no longer seems possible. The German Football League has thereby cancelled the search for an investor that we just talked about. And what we have rolled out now in practice as well as in theory has, at least with the short goal in view here, been successful. And this is, we're talking here and the news are coming in right now. It is 11 o'clock on Wednesday, February the 21st in North America. It's Wednesday evening where you are at. And breaking news.
That's pretty crazy.
I mean, that's a live reaction.
That's a great proof for my argument that football should be seen as a moral economy, huh? That also non-economic factors can be very influential to how sports develop. But yeah, that's crazy.
The assistant professor of football normally goes out in a 2-week rhythm. And I'm not the kind of podcast that is chasing current news, especially not any kind of transfer news or anything like that. But this episode, I think, needs to go out today. The clip that you just heard was recorded as I am speaking now a few hours ago in a conversation with Raphael Molter. Raphael is a political scientist in Germany. He's authored the book Friede den Kurven, Krieg den Verbänden, that is Peace to the Terraces and War to the Federations or the Leagues. Raphael's critique of the commodification, the commercialization, the reduction of soccer to just a product to be sold on TV is particularly relevant now, as the German league and its clubs have been engulfed in this discussion over whether or not to invite a private equity investor in and in return create a more marketable global TV product. Activist fans, especially ultras, have protested against this deal and against giving private equity investor that kind of foothold. They forged coalitions in media, into politics, and with other spectators in the stadium that on other issues may not be with them, and they have been successful. We didn't expect this bomb to drop during the interview, but here it is, and there's a lot to talk about, a lot to roll out of why all this kerfuffle in Germany, and what does it mean for the power fans more globally. I was going to air this episode on March 4th, but here it is for you. Listen in. He's outlining his critique. He's describing what happened in Germany over the last weeks as well. And then about halfway through the conversation, the breaking news drops that the investor deal is dead. And from there on out, we reflect about what the future might hold. Give it a like, subscribe, or spread the word. This is an unusual episode. I haven't bothered cutting much here, but I trust you will enjoy this very relevant, very timely conversation with Raphael Molter, who definitely deserves a hearing among an English-speaking audience as well, especially on this day. So have fun. Raphael, another academic, another real assistant professor of football. Welcome and greetings too. Where are you at actually right now? You're in Berlin?
Not really. No, in Gießen. Just another town in West Germany. So yeah, I don't really give another damn where I am. But yeah, it's not Berlin. It's somewhere in West Germany. Yeah.
Okay. Gießen, another town in West Germany. Berlin came to my mind first because that city occupies a big place in your football memories and in how you came to the sport. Academics then drove you elsewhere, but we'll get to that. Yeah. What's the Berlin and football connection for you? How did you grow up and get to the beautiful game?
I mean, I grew up in Berlin-Köpenick, so in the very heart of East Berlin. So yeah, I mean, I grew up there for the first 22 years of my life, I think. So yeah, Of course, I was there and I am a Unioner by birth, if you want to say it like this. So yeah, there's a very deep connection to the club. I think your listeners should know Union Berlin by now.
Yes, they should.
It's the one cold club in the first Bundesliga from East Germany.
The only one. Would you say?
I mean, do we want to talk about Red Bull Leipzig now? No. But yeah, so I have a very, very deep connection to the club. I mean, my father took me to Union when I was, I don't know, 3-4 years old, and I never left with my heart. So yeah.
Wonderful. Same story here. I think that's what it's like for many of us. And Union has seen a dramatic rise since then.
Holy shit, very yes. Good.
Yeah.
I mean, the last 10 or 15 years were somewhat like a very, very good roller coaster with one hell of a happy ending with the Champions League. And as it seems now, I think we don't get relegated into the second division. So everything's fine.
Good enough. Yeah. Did you travel across Europe quite a bit during the last years with Union?
Yeah. I mean, you can see the scarf on the back, the Reisekarte scarf. But yeah, of course, I mean, the last couple of years were a bit hard for my finances, but I went through, and I think the times in Amsterdam, in 2 times we visited Braga in Portugal. That was pretty nice. Beautiful. To be in the warm South European region. But yeah, quite an experience. Yeah. Very, 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 I don't know how to say it. It was pretty amazing to see where your own club can be 15 years after playing in the 4th division, something like that. It's a bit like Cinderella story. I think you already heard it, but yeah, it is what it is.
No, I think you're right. And listeners can't see that, but there's a scarf hanging behind Raphael that says Reisekarte is the travel squad. Special scarf that the Union fans got.
And with some history and context to the GDR, where only some big socialist members of the party could only travel into the West, and not socialist nations. So yeah, they were the Reisekarte then. We are the Reisekarte now.
Back then it was appointed, and now it's chosen following. And the faithful all get to travel. Wonderful story. All right. So Gießen, Marburg, Berlin, academics, I think, has taken you out of Köpenick. Could you let us know how that intersects with your football, with your soccer journey?
I mean, looking back at it, it kind of, it's obvious at the end of it. So I studied, and I am studying political science, which is basically, I mean, it is about politics, but you can use every other thing that happens in society and just try to mix it up with some political science methods and kind of stuff like this. So yeah, I studied my bachelor at the Freie University in Berlin. So back then, I firstly got in touch with some Marxist theories around there. And there was one particular theory written by Johannes Agnoli, an Italian-German Marxist researcher who concentrated on materialist state theory, but also was one of the very, very lonely guys in academics who understood football fans, and was described as one of the very, very few people who are crazy enough or who were crazy enough to talk to football fans. So yeah, that was the first connection. And yeah, I mean, I am a big football fan since the beginning for me. So yeah, of course, it was obvious to connect some things. The football fans in Germany had always had troubles with the officials, with the association, whether it is the German Football League, the DFL, or the German Football Association, the DFB. So with my rising as a football fan, there were all problems and issues with some kind of football organizational stuff. So it was obvious to connect it at some point. And the pandemic gave me the time to do this. So that's when the book was written, and that's why I'm here, I think. Yeah.
Yes, the book. The book in German is called Friede den Kurven, Krieg den Verbänden. I think in English, we're best off translating it with Peace to the Terraces and War to the Federations. So that would probably also include the leagues.
Mm-hmm.
The phrasing has, of course, a particular political background, and you can say more about that. The book came out in 2022. Only in German. It's not translated in English. And it's been on my mind for a while to have you on here, give the book a little bit of an English-speaking audience. We'll get into theory, I'm sure. We'll get into concrete proposals as well. But it so happens that we have you on while there's remote controls cars with smoking bombs driving over German stadiums right now. There are tennis balls flying from the stands onto the pitch, and there are the big mainstream debate shows on TV actually are hosting football fans to discuss whether or not the German football league, that's the first and the second Bundesliga, needs an investor. So some of what you're talking about has come to a head in Germany, and the eyes of many, I think, critical and active football fans globally are on Germany right now. The book is now, it's getting to 2 years old. Is this the moment of the book now? Are you seeing some of what you're writing about fulfilled? Maybe take us first into what's happening in Germany right now, and then we'll roll things out from there.
Sure, yeah. I mean, first of all, surprisingly, yeah, I think the topic of my book is more relevant than ever, and that's pretty interesting to see and to notice for me. But yeah, I think we can get along with this. I think for this one, it's nice to see that some of the, I don't know, predictions I made are coming into reality.
That normally only happens to historians, where we write a book.
Yes.
10 years later, somebody notices, oh, actually, this matters. I'm glad it's happening to you as well. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's really, it is quite surprising. But yeah, I mean, take it on there. But the situation at the moment is pretty intense in Germany. So I think some memes, some videos, some photos, everyone could have seen on social media. But if you don't know, the German Football League, the DFL, tries to involve an investor because they want to create, a company for the media revenue, or to specify that, to increase the media revenue. And for that, the German Football League thought and thinks that they need an external investor to get along with the increased foreign marketing, of course. And now they're trying to sell 8% of the media revenue of the first and second Bundesliga to an investor who is proposing CVC. That's the only investor at the moment that is at hand for the DFL. With Blackstone out of the game or out of the race, but that's something we should talk, I don't know, in 1 or 2 minutes about, because that's another point in the history. I think we have to start at the first thing that happened last year in March, April, where the German Football League published that they wanted to involve an investor. Back then, they wanted to give away 12% of media revenue and wanted to get back around 2 to 3 billion euros. That didn't happen because mainly of fan protests, because the German Football League needed to publish the plans at some point of way, and fans didn't take it so nicely.
Right, didn't take kindly to. Now, let me ask very naively, because I'm sure I have listeners who got into soccer by watching Premier League and who might want to ask, okay, what's so bad about $1 to $2 billion?
Yeah, I mean, what's the problem here? What's the problem about commercialization in football? I mean, that's really the big question that is in the room. And I think, German football is a bit different to English football and all this, mainly because of, I don't know, the 50+1 rule and some other cultural aspects that influence the German football and the organization of football long way ago. So yeah, the fan culture in Germany is, the fan culture is present at the moment. You can see this. The fan protests are big. They are getting bigger, and they are. It's always called a war on red lines, basically, just because of football fans know that also in Germany that commercialization cannot be stopped or be, I don't know, just annihilated. And we start back in 1850 and play football in the old romantic ways. That's. I think there is no football fan in Germany who believes that this is possible, but they are very, very, very much football fans that think that you need to create some red lines to just don't undergo the development and the history of the English football in the last 20, 30 years, which we all, I think, don't want to have.
Yeah.
No terraces, no standing, no beer, no smoking, no drinking, all this kind of shit.
Well, and the ownership of clubs elsewhere, the significance of hedge funds and investors who, like CVC or Blackstone in the German league, and they've also done this with other leagues, groups like that have done this with the Formula One, invest in sports purely as a commodity for media rights. So that, I think, is one of the big fears, the transformation of football as a game where fans are an active part into a purely a TV product, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think what we can see there is basically the big process that football undergoes in capitalism. So we always talk about commercialization of the sport. What we really mean is the process of commodification, the process of becoming a commodity, which is basically the whole point. That is also from a historical perspective, football is initially an intangible cultural asset, and that must be transformed into a commodity for sale in order to become part of the globalized cultural industry. That's the process that's behind that. And I think this process that is often referred to as commercialization, but should be in the following more be characterized as commodification, if I could wish for that. Yeah. Because it is not only the expansion of market logic and the other economic logics of action through the silent compulsion, of capital that we all have to work in order to pay our rent and all this kind of stuff that is happening in football. But we have also talked about the phenomenon of becoming a commodity, which triggers the commercialization in the first place, or just triggers the forms to the corresponding form that we are seeing now in many different specific ways. The English Premier League looks way different to the German Bundesliga, but they are all trying to becoming a commodity to get the process of commodification to the next level, if you would. Yeah.
Right.
I don't know. Yeah.
So Saudi ownership of Newcastle, Red Bull Leipzig are symptoms of larger processes and not kind of singular evil players in this. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that is basically my theoretical approach to football. Yes.
I've read your book well.
It's good. But I think there should be just a very brief introduction into what I think we need as a theoretical approach, just to bomb your listeners with some academic words and
yes,
stuff.
No, absolutely. Let's go there, and then as we emerge from there, see how the theoretical approach you're choosing is relevant to the current situation. I think we've outlined briefly, but well enough, what's happening in Germany right now and the challenges that are at stake, and why I think fans of soccer globally should look to Germany a little bit right now. So let's get behind the scenes a little bit and get some of the theoretical scaffolding up so we can climb this whole issue. Yeah.
I think, let's go. So the theoretical approach is yeah, it has not been named in academic discourses. I've been using it, and I try to name it in the German language, and I don't have any good translation, so maybe you can help me out. But I think of a materialist theory of sports, or a materialist criticism or critique of sports, which basically means that I use Marxist approaches and others to try to understand football and sports in general as a social phenomenon. But that as a social phenomenon that does not, however, reproduce or just reproduce the problems of a society in the so-called microcosm, or, I don't know, in Germany, you're always saying about the magnifying glass, football stadium and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, it's society in small. Yeah. Okay. Right. But football isn't like this, but it is a social phenomenon, a specific social phenomenon. And of course, it is closely linked to social, to economic, to political, ethical forces, but it forms its own configurations. And that's basically the thought behind the need to understand football within the society we are living in and we are moving in, and also football as some organized sports is always moving in society, and we have to understand the specific configurations between society and sports. That's the thought about that. And to just go a little bit deeper into why football isn't a cultural good anymore, and we have to talk about the process of commodification. Mm-hmm. It is very important to make a difference clear between the globalized football industry on the one hand and US sports and the leagues like NBA, NFL, MLB, MLS on the other hand, because football does not produce a simple commodity for profit, and this is interesting, this has been analyzed by sports economists that are not Marxists or anything, very liberal sports economics that say, like Frank Schumann, a German sport economic, quote unquote, he wrote, sports economic studies show that Bundesliga clubs are not profit-orientated companies in the strict sense. And what he meant was that several studies indicate that a high proportion of the profits of the clubs and leagues end up with the players in the form of salaries, and according to which the individual capitals, which means the clubs, who are organizing football and creating the whole competition that we call football, in professional football, they pursue revenue maximization, not profit maximization. And that is because the leagues aren't closed. We don't have any salary caps, and we don't have something like a draft system. These are main structural differences that impact the whole football industry very much. So we have to say that the transformation behind the commodification of football is that we have a cultural asset, and the changing or the transformation into a commodity is unstable if we look at the football industry. And this points us as basically two problems that we can discover, whether we go historically into the history of football or we just look at the actual problems now, which basically is the question of investors or involving investors. What we basically see at the moment is a very crisis in the European football industry, basically since the pandemic, if you want to. And in order to explain why there should be a crisis, or we could name it a crisis in European football, we just have to look at two questions. The first question is, how does capital accumulation take place in European professional football? And I think it is important to know that the dominant mode of accumulation in football is historically changing. But for the European football industry, the sale of the TV licenses has been the most important source of income since the early 1990s. So there is and dominant mode of accumulation in football since the 1990s.
Yep.
And the annual review of football's finance 2023 by Deloitte's Sports Business Group has confirmed that. So in all 5 top European leagues, so England, Spain, Germany, Italy, and France, the TV broadcasting accounts for almost half of total revenue. And the matchday revenue does not exceed 14% in any of the leagues. Sponsorship, on the other hand, being the second most important source of income. So it's pretty interesting to see that it's extremely important to get TV license money. And you...
Maybe just one point here quickly. We should say the growing edge of that TV licensing money is global. So it's not that there's the big money that's left for investors to take a hold of in the German market for the German league, or the French market for the French league, but it's globally. And so it's located somewhere where the fans are not. And I think that is important in a very tangible way as well. But go on.
Exactly. I mean, this is exactly the kind of process of globalizing football industry at this point. On the other hand, when you look at the mode of accumulation who is at stake, because if you are not the English Premier League or the UEFA Champions League, you won't be able to get more and more money out of selling TV licenses. You have to be creative. You need to think about foreign marketing. You have to think of many different ways to kind of, get your money in order to just finance what you're doing. So the thing next to accumulation is regulation. And the question, how is the relative order of the football sphere formed? And the most important thing and the connecting thing to the DFL's search for investor is basically that the national and the supranational football associations, if you want to call it like this, are the institutions of football. They are the necessary glue for securing the prevailing conditions in football around the establishment of capitalistic logics. So they take on a role as ideal overall capitalists in a way, and they bear the responsibility for the commercial development and the shaping of capitalist football. So a football association like the German Football Association or the German Football League, the DFL, organizes the production of professional football as a commodity by organizing football operations in the respective leagues. So the DFL organizes the first and the second Bundesliga, and the respective football clubs and their individual interests are organized within it. So whereby an association reflects the respective balance of power of the clubs organized in. I mean, you can tell that Bayern Munich has a bit more to say than FC Hansa Rostock, a club who plays in the second division and comes out of East Germany. Yeah. So
thus your focus on federations and leagues as the locus for change.
Yes.
The term you use, the materialist critique of sports, is this something that you'd say is emerging? Are we waiting for its emergence? Are there conversation partners that you have?
I mean, there's the Würzburg Institute for Fair Culture. So that's one point where some people do know about the concept and the name, but at the moment it is really more in the making that really established, just because, you have to look at football if you want to define football as a social phenomenon, you have to understand how the economic part works, how the embedding in society of football as a sphere works, and how you can explain and define it. And you have to get a historical approach to this too. You have to understand where the football organizations come, where the federations came. So it is not really that present in German academics, but it is what it is. I think I have the feeling that mostly football academics are more like, oh yeah, that's kind of a nice hobby to do next to the other thing that you have to just in order to get paid for. And yeah, of course, that's a critical point, to get beyond this and just to explain to people it's important to understand what's happening in football.
And not solely focus on nice stories that revolve around identity. I think that's the other trend in the field. And I've always understood the podcast as a little bit of an antidote to the kind of, well, let's focus on the World Cup in 1986 and how wonderful it was, that kind of football history, but to take a more critical approach. And your work certainly is cutting edge there. So I'm very glad you're on. In alignment with what you've just said, where do you see the current protests then? Are they hitting some of the notes that will put your theories into a practical, concrete critique and a practical movement for change? How would you assess what's going on in Germany with your approach as kind of an underlying baseline?
So I just start off and just go on with my analysis to the protests. I think that's the best view of what I think is happening. The status quo of the fan protests is very easy to resume. And so for this, the protests of the last few weeks, you've already talked about flying shit and cars, and it was pretty funny to see this over the last.
It's not literal shit, but stuff. Chocolate coins and tennis balls and whatever. Yeah.
So one thing you can say is that the media publicity has been established over the last couple of weeks, and I think there's an overwhelming majority of stadium visitors on the one hand and television viewers on the other hand. They are on the side of the protesters. Some studies point in this direction that we can talk about 60 to 70% of the people who are connected to football in one way or the other who are supporting the protests at the moment. That is a big number. But being this on the side, there are some fan scenes that are previously went silent about the protests. Frankfurt, Magdeburg, I think Düsseldorf, where there are some fan scenes. They are not involved in the protests, and it looks like they remain uninvolved, mainly because their club officials voted with a no at the DFL assembly, where they put it to a vote whether or not to search for an investor or get involved with an investor. So the fan scenes there are just like, I don't know. It's that's not our beer, huh?
Right. They already see themselves as on the right side. We already cast the right vote. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, some other fan scenes like the ones of Hertha or Union, they are involved. They are deeply involved in the protests. Their respected club officials also voted with no, I think. So it's a bit confusing, but that's it's maybe a bit too into detail at this point. The thing is that the protest character of the whole fan movement and the protests is actually reduced to a new vote by the DFL clubs on the question of investors. And I think that is pretty interesting, because that's what we are experiencing is a strategy of the club officials and the officials of the DFL to just get along with the fan protests and get them slowed down a bit, I think. But at the heart of the current protests against the investor involvement in German professional football is, I think, the desire of fans to raise their voice, just raise it, so that the officials and the ones who are organizing the sport must and can hear it. And they want to influence the future of their sport. And I think that's something that really comes into mind if you think about tennis balls and all that went onto the pitch. So and there is a big statement issued by a number of important fan alliances across Germany on February the 9th, where yeah, I mean, the statement sharply criticizes the German Football League for ignoring the fan protests and the demands for a transparent new vote on the investor deal. But according to the alliances, this lack of dialogue exposes the DFL's offer as a fig leaf. And it shows no real willingness to negotiate. I mean, that was kind of obvious. But
there is a version of this statement where at least parts are translated into English. So I'll put that in the show notes so listeners can look it up as well in their own words. Yeah.
Great. Because in addition, the vote by the club officials on December 11th, where the second try of the involvement with investors took place in the DFL's General Assembly with the 36 club officials, this was accompanied by a number of accusations that democratic principles had not been adhered to. So the cases surrounding Martin Kind and his possible ignorance of the instruction from Hannover's parent club is to vote no in the referendum illustrates. I don't know if we should explain what happened there.
Yeah, well, just briefly, what's going on in Hanover is a very special situation where you have the delegate and a kind of investor in his own right, the club, was charged to vote no against the deal at the assembly. It's pretty clear that he voted yes, thereby raising questions about ignoring democratic principles within club that go to the heart of the 50+1 question. So who has the say in how a club conducts itself in this? And apparently Mr. Kind, who is the man in Hanover, ignored that. Yeah.
Pretty much, yeah. So I think the problem there is not that Martin Kind is not a good club official. I think the problem isn't solved just to erase Kind's vote and just go on with it, because I think the deeper problem lies in the capitalization of football, and which goes beyond the mere question of the participation of an investor. So we need to address the increasing alienation of fans from the game through commercialization and the transformation of football into a product, commodification. So, I mean, this all points to the need to fundamentally question the power structures within football. And I mean, the fan protests show us that, it demands alternative forms of organization that give fans and players more influence, I think. And instead of this, a rift has opened up in the recent weeks between club supporters and fans. So players and coaches are also complaining about excessively long breaks, a loss of momentum in the game, and you name it. It's just it's jeopardized by the protests. And for the most part, the organized fans take this as a challenge to the soccer millionaires and mercenaries. But I think that's a problem at the moment, where we could say maybe there should be looking out for some common ground, because after all, marketing and the exploitation of football requires two things: fans and players. Fans who consume, who spend money, and contribute their passion. As football is a moral economy or an embedded economy. Holy shit. Sorry for that. But right. Also second, the players who play the game. And I mean, the players are something like the raw material for the football product. And every reform in recent years, the Champions League reform, the introduction of the UEFA Nations League, the FIFA Club World Cup, who has been reformed last year or this year, I don't know. These all have been carried out on the back of the players too. And I think there's potential to, I don't know, draw a connection between the fan protests and the players who at the moment don't really understand what's going on.
And yet who have to perform more and more games in order to sustain the product. Now, if I read it right, chapter 2 in your book is a bit of a critique of the common ground approach. So should fans collaborate across borders with players' organization, with federations, with leagues, or would you advocate a different approach?
I think I changed my mind a bit in the last couple of years. So I think it's important to understand that in order to shift control of football back from the current commercial structures back to the fans and the local communities, you cannot do this without any power in any sense. So you need to create, and you need to be willing to create connections, and I don't know, just to get along with some other players in the game who are essentially involved into this, mainly the players and maybe the refs. So yeah, I do think that the idea of I don't know, a democratic self-governance of the sport is extremely important and should be the utopia of all of this. But if you don't want to just talk about it, but just really want to fight about it, you have to think about realistic approaches that can guarantee some way of, I don't know, to convince majorities of your ideas, to just be able to not only talk about what you want to do, but just to get, I don't know, some social majorities just for the idea of, even if we want to change football, and even if we all can agree to that the specific point of commercialization where the German football stands at is not that good, we need to explain, and there is a need to explain, that the commercialization doesn't stop with a no now. And there is a connection between the commercialization of football or of any other kind of sphere in our lives, even if we're talking about living, or I don't know, if we're talking about hospitals. Commercialization, commodification is everywhere, and we can create lines between that. And it is not only interesting for us as academics, but it is also very interesting for the people who are actually protest and fight for a better living. So there are possible ways to connect, and I think it is important. And it is also important to go into discussions with club officials. I think this is also another point where I turned a bit, because 2 or 3 years ago I pointed out that there should be a very, very big rift between the fan base and club officials.
You did.
I think this is more of a dogmatic approach that's not so realistic at the moment. And this is basically thanks to, I don't know, that I went on to 20 or 25 different locations to talk and discuss with people about my book and the ideas of it. And of course, there are fan scenes that don't get along with their club officials or their club board, where you can see agonism between them, which can be productively used for the fight for better football against the commercialization. But there are other examples, especially East German clubs, or clubs who are not in the first or second division in Germany, where the involvement between, for example, ultras and the club structure in general, where there is a deep connection, because you just have to. There are not 800 people at every club in Erfurt, Jena, or whatever, any East German city, where you can just, get along, and every group just go for their own work and just separate themselves for. This is not possible there. So they have to influence club officials, and they're doing this. And I think a very interesting example is FSV Zwickau. If you don't know, FSV Zwickau is an East German club that plays in the fourth tier, I think.
Fourth league now, because they had to go down, in part due to the situation that provoked the fan act. But you can share a little bit more about this. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. The interesting thing about it is that at FSV Zwickau, initiative that just promoted football belongs to the fans. This initiative solved the very, very big financial problems of the club with the crowdfunding project because they decided not to get involved with another external investor. And the initiative tried to accumulate, I don't know, 500,000 euros, I think, in 2 or 3 months via crowdfunding, and they succeeded it. So crazy success, if you want to say it like this. But the interesting thing about the initiative is that it shows how fans can become active and contribute directly to the preservation and shaping of their club. And through crowdfunding and involvement in club committees, in the club board, they are demonstrating that alternatives to the commercial focus are possible, that places the club and its values at the center with going into the club, into the power structures. So countervailing power is therefore needed to stop the madness, if you'd like, and organized fans should not allow dogmatic ideals and values to stop them. So every grasp for power always carries with it the danger of corruption, but there is no alternative to building up counter power. There just isn't. So screaming for a different kind of football in the stands without a voice or influence only helps so much. So the ideals, the values of ultras, of fans must be measured against reality. And this is basically my argument why I turned at this point.
Right. And the call for allies and to move into those power structures. To talk about how much of the discourse is German, how much is applicable to fans and friends of the game elsewhere too. But could you share a little bit about what the utopia out there might be? You've already used the word.
I mean,
what is the ideal alternative structure that you have in mind? What's the utopia that we can allow ourselves to at least gradually be thinking toward?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we all have to acknowledge that there is a dialectic connection between society and sports. So whatever happens in sports, even how good it could be, it only helps so much if we are all living in a capitalist society with all the silent compulsion we've been talking about. So there is a problem with that we cannot talk about any socialist ideas of how football globally could be organized without thinking about the global status quo in a political way on societies. But I think it is worth to describe some of the ideas that could evolve in the German protests at the moment, because it gives a little bit of insight what is possible at the moment, and what I think is a learning out of other football movements too. And I'm talking about the football movement in Turkey at the Gaza. No, not the Gaza. The Gezi protests.
Gezi protests, yes.
Mm-hmm. Or if
against Turkish government occupation movement in the center square in Istanbul. Yeah,
exactly. And I think the one thing that is applicable for the German protests or beyond that is that it is about shifting control of not only football, but of football from current commercial structures back to the fans and local communities. And this not really happened on only the football side of things, but already in society where things are very much at a crisis. So they build up something like, I don't know, we could say they are councils, and the proposition or the proposal would be for not only the German protests at the moment, that it could be interesting that if organized fans could call for reorientation of football away from capitalist profit interests and towards a model that sees sports as a common good, accessible to all and managed by the participants themselves. And for this, I think we see the need to redefine the relationship between fans, players, and the sport itself by moving the commercial aspects into the background and instead emphasizing the social and cultural values of football. The thing is, I don't think that any person or any individual should say, I have the plan for how football should really be organized. Mm-hmm. And this is not up for individuals. This should be up for everyone who is practically involved in football. So fans, players, refs. And for this, I think you need something like club councils. And this could be idea for the German protests, as I mentioned. And for this, there is a demand in progress. So just that you heard, disband the German Football League and all power to the fans. And this demand reflects the conviction that football is a community affair that should be based on the principles of democracy and participation, not by talking about it, but by doing it. And
so it should be clear that the demand here is not to disband with league play, but to disband the structure of a league organized around producing a commodity and return power to base democracy-led councils, one in each club. Is that what you're suggesting?
I mean, there could be more. That would be a very interesting case where I would say just, every club, every city is a bit special. The fan culture is different, is everywhere very different. So I think the main thing that is important now is that there is, on a structural level, there is an agony between the fans on the one side as an alternative to the football organizations on the other hand. And this should be more mentioned, or could be more mentioned, by building those club councils. And the establishment of those club councils could be an essential step towards changing the balance of power in professional football and giving the sport back to the fans in the community. And at the same time, and this is just like the dialectical approach to this, we will also learn how to treat each other better. There is direct communication with people you don't know yet. And I think that's one of the main principles that should be, I don't know, it's just society, huh? You should be in touch with others who you don't know actually yet.
Now, I might have to throw our conversation and the episode that is made up by this conversation out much earlier than I was going to initially do. I don't know if you're checking your social media as we're talking, but
no.
I just got alerts here, and this is just a few minutes ago. From Deutsche Welle, Sports, Mr. Watzke. Yes, Mr. Watzke, spokesman for the DFL, quote, in view of the current developments, a successful continuation of the process, and that is the process of finding a media rights investor, no longer seems possible. The German Football League has thereby canceled the search for an investor that we just talked about. And what we have rolled out now in practice as well as in theory has, at least with the short goal in view here, been successful. And we're talking here, and the news are coming in right now. It is 11 o'clock on Wednesday, February the 21st in North America. It's Wednesday evening where you are at. And breaking news.
That's pretty crazy.
I mean, that's a live reaction.
That's a great proof for my argument that football should be seen as a moral economy, huh? That also non-economic factors can be very influential to how sports develop. But yeah, that's crazy. I haven't. Wow.
I mean, the knee church take is, tennis balls and rowdies in the stands are successful. We have outlined for almost an hour now. There's much more at stake. There's much more going on. I'm happy reading this. We're not at Eurotopia, but quite something, isn't it?
Of course. It is pretty interesting to see how drastically the DFL changed their minds. But yeah, that's pretty interesting. I'm not really sure how the next weekends will come out of this. I don't know if the fan protests will just stop immediately, but it looks like it. And I think we were talking about the TV license and the need of getting media income for the football clubs and the leagues. I think this really shows that the German Football League sees the danger, because in April, so in a month and a bit, the DFL wanted to start negotiations about the next TV deals, which including the seasons of 2024, 25 to 28, 29, I think. So the next 5 years. I don't think they wanted to jeopardize this with some fan protests that went wild. Huh?
I mean, with this in mind, I am fairly certain I'm going to get this live and online much quicker than anticipated. But also, we can talk about now if fan protests should stop and how much of the momentum now carries into the utopia you have just outlined. Do you have a quick take on that?
I mean, it is quite obvious that the protests now are going to an end. But this won't, with this being said, this won't be the last time you've heard of us. So I do think that, especially with an upcoming Europa Cup in Germany, where we already experienced police violence and repression all over the place as active and organized fans, there are some topics that are important at the moment and, could be coming back at the surface, I think. For the protests against the involvement of an investor, I think that's it for the moment. I do think that the DFL has now learned that they need new strategies to understand how to get along with organized fans, and I think this now pretty much shows that the DFL accepts that they shattered the dreams just because I don't think that they could have known that the fan protests went along as they went with the media thing and all this. But yeah,
I don't know if all these chairpersons changed their minds, but should be clear to them that a recalibration of the approach is needed here. This is going to be interesting weeks ahead.
Yeah, they are. I'm very interested in about the next couple of weeks, especially because of the upcoming TV negotiations and the Euro Cup, which basically means the topics are on the desk and they will be staying on the desk, if you want to say it like this. So it's going to be very interesting to see if the organized fans are trying and willing to keep some of the protests just in case, because everybody knows the next couple of months won't be silent, or maybe the DFL wants the next month and the negotiations to be silent. But yeah, it is very interesting to see. It feels a bit like, I don't know, like a capitulation of the DFL, huh?
Yeah, I think that's how you have to read it, especially in this short of a time frame.
And it is a very big win for the fans.
Yeah,
and it shows their influence on the game.
And eyes on Germany too for fans in other countries. This is what's possible. Now, we talked about red lines earlier.
Mm-hmm.
The investor deal represents some of those, but it's not that the commodification of football globally is halted now, that the DFL has abandoned its plans. Where to go from here, Raphael?
I think the most important
in American language, what's the next frontier?
I think the next big thing could be the development in Saudi Arabia, in comparison to what is happening in England, because there are some interesting parallels, which means that in England or in Great Britain, they're trying to establish a football association board that is connected into the state and into the government, and has the power to control the Premier League. The thing, or the model in Saudi Arabia, is pretty much a radicalization of this, but it could be a way out of the problems of the crisis I described earlier. So the accumulation problem won't go away. And I do think that the regulation problem with, one of the biggest football associations, with the DFL, just going basically down on the knees because some fans were throwing tennis balls. That's pretty impressive, but it makes clear that there is some kind of crisis also in the regulation. So there could be some interesting things in the next couple of years where some other national governments, or maybe the EU Commission, will look into some other models of organizing football and preventing the whole commercialization to go unregulated.
Unregulated. So the European Union Commission, there's talk about a football regulator in England, a relatively toothless concept, but at least there's talk about it. European Union level, you would probably look to them to be at the forefront here as well. Yeah.
It could be interesting. And I don't know what you think, but they have to take another way out of this. They have to solve the accumulation problem. Investors won't solve it. TV media companies won't solve it, because we know that DAZN and Sky are pretty much at the end of their portemonnaie. They're their money back. So yeah.
No, they are. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think this could be an interesting approach. We have to take an eye on this.
Yes, and maybe we should talk again. But interesting to see these news pop up right now as we speak. Good timing for us.
Pretty neat.
Just as we were talking about utopia. Well, you already mentioned the European Union. I mentioned England. And my next question was going to be, anyways, how much of a German discourse is all of that? And what can fans in other countries and in other contexts learn from what's going on, or what has been going on in Germany?
I think the main thing is that Germany is a pretty... I don't know, if you want to talk about the German society, I mean, you know that it is more of the more richer societies on a global scale. So it is pretty interesting that so many fans, or so many people were protesting against commercialization of the cultural good, which is, I mean, football has no practical impact on the day-to-day life. Even if you are an ultra, of course, you identify yourself extremely with football, and it is an important part. But whether you have to pay, I don't know, or you have to pay 20 or 50 euros for a ticket, it is, of course, a practical impact into life. But in comparison to all the other things, it is pretty small if you want to. So the interesting thing is that football obviously has the power to influence people and to drive people to not only criticize what's going on, but to try to understand what's happening. So I think that's a very interesting perspective out of Germany at the moment, is that there are more and more people who want to know why this is happening. And the journalist discourse, the media discourse about football gets more and more complex every week the protests went on. So I think this is a good sign going forward to just acknowledge football isn't just a hobby. It isn't anywhere. And I think if you want to talk about Germany or Saudi Arabia or the Middle East or Great Britain, football and sports in general is a great way to understand what is happening there. And I think for what is happening in Germany, we can see that there is something on the way, and the people are not really interested in what the DFL is proposing them. Another step of commercialization. They don't like it at all.
Conversely, you also can't fight what you don't understand. And the process of fans educating themselves in Germany is one that's entirely possible elsewhere too. Why not? Are there some resources? Is there some literature that we could point English-speaking listeners to learn a little bit more about what you're talking about? I mean, of course, we hope your stuff gets translated at some point, yes. But what else might there be out there? What resources out there? Or also, what signs of hope? What activist organizations are you aware of elsewhere that are after similar things?
I think the most important thing to notice is that I don't think there is some English literature about the German ultras. Or am I wrong?
Not about the German ultras specifically. Yeah, that's correct.
So yeah, that is a point that could be interesting, but yeah, isn't there? That could be interesting just to get along German fan culture and to understand where it's coming from. That would be a great approach. Overall, I think Gabriel Kuhn's book, Soccer versus the State, is one of the main things I have to say, just because it deeply influenced what I'm doing. And yeah, it's one of the big things.
It's a great reminder. Read it again and also re-listen to episode 2 of the Assistant Professor of Football. That's when we had Gabriel on. He may well be listening to this as well. Recommendation goes out again: Soccer versus the State. Gabriel Kuhn is the author. Okay. Do you see organizations, activist organizations elsewhere that give you hope for not necessarily replicating what's happening in Germany, but for addressing some similar problems, framing a similar discourse?
That's an interesting question. I mean, there are political organizations all over the place where, I mean, you do get hope when you see what they're doing, and what their approach is on changing things is there are similarities. At the moment, there is, I mean, of course, I mentioned in my book that there is an initiative in Berlin, my home city, where people trying to get the living problem under control, where, I mean, there is also the big topic is commercialization.